Hi, I'm Shayla. Today we're going to be talking about lakes and ponds biome. This is a map of the United States, and the blue dots are ponds, and the orange dots are lakes. We'll start off with the definition of the lakes and ponds. A pond is a body of water shallow enough to support rooted plants. Water temperature is fairly even from the top to the bottom and changes with air temperature. There is little wave action and the bottom is usually covered with mud. Plants can and often do grow along the pond edge. The amount of dissolved oxygen may vary greatly during the day. In really cold places, the entire pond can freeze solid. In addition, a lake is bigger than a pond and is also too deep to support rooted plants except near the shore. Water temperatures in lakes during the summer months is not uniform from top to bottom. 3 distinct layers also develop. The top layer, called the epimelion, stays warm about 65 to 75 degrees Fahrenheit. The middle layer, called the metallomion, its temperature usually ranges from 45 to 65 degrees Fahrenheit. And the bottom layer is the coldest, called the hypolemmian, and it stays around 39 to 45 degrees Fahrenheit because light doesn't penetrate to the bottom and photosynthesis is limited to the top layer. So this is a picture of the world, and it's freshwater resources per capita. You can see that usually the desert biomes and the Sahara or the tropical grasslands usually have the least amount of freshwater resources per capita. However, these spots aren't the driest ecosystems on Earth, but that's besides the point. This is also a picture of, or a map of the world. You can see the dark blue, that is represents the freshwater biomes. You can see there's rivers, the Nile River, Amazon River in Africa, the Amazon River in South America, and some lakes, the Great Lakes in America, the Mississippi River. So this is what I was talking about earlier, the zones of the lake. So you see the epimelion, the metallomion, and the hypolemmion, and each of these are usually just in lakes because ponds are too shallow to separate. I will be referring to these zones throughout this presentation: the benthic zone, the profundal zone, the limnic zone, and the littoral zone. So the littoral zone usually keeps rooted plants. The limnic zone is usually just the top layer and some of the middle layer, the epimelion and the metallomion. And the profundal zone is usually just the hypolemmion. And the benthic zone is pretty much just type like sediment that comes to the bottom, and this part goes through all 3 zones. So these are abiotic factors of the lakes and ponds ecosystem. It includes light, nutrients, oxygen, the pH of the water, temperature, and turbulence. So for much of the freshwater, the primary source of energy is light. That includes in rivers and everything else. However, the levels of light under the water will vary according to many factors. 1, the time of day and the season. 2, the depth of the lake or pond. 3, the turbidity of the water, or how clear the water is. And 4, the amount of cloud cover. And 5, the altitude of the lake. So for minerals, minerals that are present in will depend very much on the geology of the land, which the water inflow crosses. Nitrogen enters in the form of ammonia or nitrates, which can be due to agricultural land and will encourage eutrophication, which will lead to algal blooms. This means the substantial growth of plant material, which is algal blooms. Phosphate occurs naturally in small amounts and combines with iron to form ferric phosphate, which precipitates to the benthic region, which is the bottom of the pond or lake. However, phosphate is now a significant pollutant of water entering from farmland and will also result in eutrophication, which will lead to anoxic conditions, which means that there will be no oxygen in the water for plants or animals to survive. Decomposition releases valuable nutrients and is vital for the recycling of materials within freshwater ecosystems. Leaves falling from trees in autumn may be blown significant distances, but the moment they touch the surface tension, they stop and eventually sink to be trapped and decompose. Also, temperature is one of the major factors affecting freshwater ecosystems. The main effects of temperature are distribution of organisms both seasonally and vertically through the water, and the behavior and reproduction of organisms. So the lower the temperature, the higher the saturation of oxygen. Conversely, the warmer the water gets, the lower amount of oxygen that can be dissolved in it. Oxygen is essential for most of the life in the freshwater, even though some can live anaerobically in the mud, which means they live without oxygen. But the majority of organisms need a steady supply of oxygen, and if the temperature rises, that will be a problem. Also, the pH, you can see the pH scale right there. The pH can vary enormously between ponds and lakes due to bedrock, topography, and even the species of plant present. Carbon dioxide dissolves in the water to produce carbonic acid, and so it's a measurement of the level of CO2 available for photosynthesis. So measurement of the pH in a pond or a lake over a 24-hour period will demonstrate a very high variety of pH. So at dawn, the water will be acidic due to the high level of carbon dioxide released through respiration overnight and by all the living organisms present. And then as the sun rises, photosynthesis becomes available and it occurs, and the level of carbon acid declines. By midday, the water may become increasingly alkaline until the sun sets. But the reduction in light and photosynthesis halts, and only respiration is occurring in the organisms, and the pH decreases accordingly. So turbulence is caused by the wind, and it can be very influential. It may cause substantial movement in the surface, and the prevailing wind direction can be easily determined by looking around the lake. So debris will be moved onto particular shores, and this wind action also creates underwater currents. It will not only move inanimate objects, but it will be central to distribution. Strong winds in the spring and autumn are also the cause of the breakdown of thermocline that helps induce nutrient movement from the benthos, which is the bottom layer again. So key plants and animal species in a pond system are similar and almost identical of that to the of a lake ecosystem. In typical freshwater biomes, there are many living organisms that interact with each other daily. Primary producers include phytoplankton, which bloom when the lake stratifies during the spring, as well as Daphnia, which are crustacean grazers. Primary consumers include flatworms, insect larvae, snails, frogs, and other animals which consume the producers. Secondary consumers include insects and fish, which consume the primary consumers. Lastly, tertiary consumers include birds, river otters, muskrats, and raccoons, and that only consume the secondary consumers. So this is a pond ecosystem. Obviously, ponds are shallower than lakes. So when we look at the lake ecosystem, it's much more diverse, and there's a lot more different types of organisms that will be in the benthic zone or in the different zones. Key autotrophs. It's harder for lakes and ponds to support large communities of vegetation because of their great depth. Ponds probably have more rooted plants. The plants found in these biomes normally consist of grasses and weeds. Sometimes plants like cattails and lily pads, water lilies, can be found floating in shallow lakes and ponds. Primary producers include phytoplankton, which is also algae. Another autotroph is grassy pondweed and regular grasses and weeds. Grassy pondweed is native to the northern hemisphere, where it grows in shallow, clean water. And this is actually a problem in some states, or mostly I watched a video on it. It's a problem in places like Texas. Grassy pondweed was probably introduced to lake biomes or pond biomes when someone probably purposely dumped their fish tank into the water. And grassy pondweed can reproduce and become a problem for people trying to fish. It just gets like caught in boats, and also it can create anoxic conditions because it's blocking the sunlight from hitting other zones of the lake, and also it takes a lot of the oxygen of the water. Key heterotrophs. So zooplankton, the small zooplankton are eaten by the larger zooplankton, which are in turn eaten by small fish, aquatic insects, and so on. Freshwater zooplankton are found in the water in wetland areas. They are most abundant near the surface as they eat phytoplankton, or algae, which need light to photosynthesize. Zooplankton are organisms that have animal-like traits. The biggest are only 5 millimeters long, and the smallest are just 1,000th of this size. They float, drift, or weakly swim in the water. In fact, the name plankton comes from the Greek word planktos, which means wanderer or drifter. Zooplankton encompass a wide range of both unicellular and multicellular animals. While most zooplankton are heterotrophs, meaning they obtain their energy from consuming organic compounds such as algae or other zooplankton, some zooplankton may also be fully or partially photosynthetic, gaining their energy as plants do from sunlight. Then we also have frogs and snakes. They're very abundant more in the mainland. We don't have snakes here in Hawaii, but in the lakes and ponds biome, frogs reproduce pretty rapidly and are very abundant in lakes and ponds. The great egret is classified as a water bird, but is also found in grasslands, wetlands, agricultural fields, desert, wood, swamps, and even the ocean. Great egrets feast on insects and on small fish. And then the damselfly and the dragonfly are generalists. That is, they eat whatever suitable prey is abundant. Oftentimes, they hunt in groups where large numbers of termites or ants are flying, or near swarms of mayflies, caddisflies, or gnats. According to most studies, the main diet of full audinates consists of small insects, especially flies. Maturing dragonfly larvae feed very intensively, as do females when developing their eggs. Food shortage may limit reproductive behavior, and dragonflies do not hunt in cold weather. Damselflies are not limited by temperature and have been observed hunting and during cold spells. Males are territorial, sometimes patrolling for their prey for hours at a time. Dragonflies are predators, and so are damselflies. But they also must be wary of other predators such as birds, lizards, frogs, spiders, fish, water bugs, and even other large dragonflies. So there are a wide variety of freshwater and saltwater scavengers available, including fish, snails, and shrimp, to help rid the biome of excess algae and other decomposable items such as other dead organisms, plants that have fallen, leaves that have fallen, and they create more nutrients for the biome. Freshwater scavengers and algae-eating fish are well adapted for scraping algae from flat surfaces because they are sucker-mouth bottoms feeders that help clean waste. You can see like a type of catfish there for the bottom-dwelling fish, shrimp, and freshwater bacteria that all help to decompose waste material. Flatworms and snails also do the same thing. However, snails sometimes can be predators, not just scavengers. So lake and biome problems. There's platonic algae blooms. And these blooms can quickly lead to oxygen loss. They do this by blocking out sunlight, which is critical for photosynthetic activity. Algal blooms. Well, all lakes have some level of platonic algae under the surface. At normal levels, they're not harmful and can actually help overall aquatic health or water quality. However, when algae levels are elevated, they can quickly cause an unsightly nuisance bloom that disrupts the pond's ecosystem, potentially upsetting fish stocks. These blooms are typically caused by a combination of water temperature and nutrient count. Overabundant vegetation. Similarly, an overabundance of aquatic flora can have the same negative effects on lakes or ponds, such as a large algal bloom. By disrupting the delicate balance of oxygen production, nuisance plants put fish populations and just general aquatic populations at risk. So sewage runoff can cause bacterial growth, such as like when plants die, they release nutrients into the water. However, sewage runoff is human-caused. Algal blooms and overabundant vegetation are also caused by nutrient runoff, or can be caused by nutrient runoff from farms and industrial sites. This picture shows Lake Isabel in Colorado. It is an irrigation reservoir that is drained every August. So the drainage causes more erosion. The erosion, population increase, and irresponsible local farming practices and industrial overuse has caused for the lake to be like this now. Farmers get a lot of the blame around the world for having abused nearby lakes. They're accused of having relentlessly pumped water for the lakes. The surrounding areas of the lakes have as a closed catchment, already suffering from increasing temperatures and erratic rainfall. But farmers have been working in regions for generations, while population growth in both rural and urban areas has strained delicate water resources. Ecosystem services. Some services are obvious, like drinking water. Some are less obvious, or easier to take for granted, like crop pollination, the prevention of soil erosion, and protection from storms. When freshwater habitats are destroyed, we lose the beneficial ecosystem services they provide to people. This undermines the sustained well-being of future generations and directly affects the livelihoods of many rural poor who depend on these services. Sustainable development requires an ecosystem-based approach to wetland management that considers the values and benefits of different ecosystem services provided by freshwater habitats. Another ecosystem service is hydro dams. We build hydro dams, also creating a man-made lake on the other side of this river, or this flow of water, which creates a man-made lake or a reservoir. And this flow of water creates a lot of electricity. We have many in the United States. The biggest one is located in China. This provides a lot of electricity, and it provides it at a cheap because it's sustainable. So the WWF in the middle with the panda is the World Wildlife Fund, and it's working with governments, development groups, and aid agencies to ensure that international and national work develops Millennium Development Goals and has a clear, good reference to freshwater habitat protection and integrity with reference to environmental flows. It also ensures that national poverty reduction strategy papers incorporate and address freshwater habitat protection, and they demonstrate solutions to freshwater conservation and also the socio-economic benefits of freshwater ecosystem conservation. The Nature Conservancy on the bottom left, they work to protect rivers and lakes. They attempt to reduce the impacts of dams which are hydro dams that create electricity, because they can create too much oxygen, which leads to a hypoxic solution in the water, which can also kill many organisms. The Conservancy is developing sophisticated financial tools to gather investments from water users and direct the funding towards conservation of key lands upstream that filter and regulate water supply. Conservation International on the right, they create projects that integrate science and natural resource management to inform policy and land use decisions regarding dam development, agricultural development, watershed management, and tourism development. They also increase knowledge of management alternatives, incorporate freshwater values into development decisions, strengthen markets for freshwater services, and promote enabling policies and governance from headwater to estuary. The Charles Stewart Mott Foundation seeks to advance the conservation and restoration of freshwater ecosystems in North America, with emphasis on the Great Lakes, and to a lesser extent portions of the southeastern U.S. They give grants to key organizations active in freshwater issues, particularly state-level and regional groups, to build their organizational capacity. This is a YouTube video about Texas and the abiotic and biotic factors of their lakes and ponds biomes.
Texas has 1 million acres of freshwater lakes, ponds, and reservoirs. It's where we play, where most of our drinking water comes from. And surprise, all but one of our lakes are man-made. Lakes and ponds are fascinating and complex ecosystems. Scientists think of lakes in layers. What you see along the banks and in shallow areas is different from life deep down, where it is colder and darker. Each layer is a balance of aquatic life, water chemistry, dissolved oxygen, light, and nutrients. But a new threat is spreading quickly, turning some of our lakes into now you see it, now you don't. Giant salvinia, water hyacinth, and hydrilla are highly invasive exotic aquatic plants that can double in size in a week. They choke lakes, ruin fishing and swimming, and clog water intakes for water supplies and power plants. These invasive plants and animals were likely introduced into the wild when someone dumped out a fish aquarium, or a water garden overflowed into a creek and into the watershed. Zebra mussels are another invader that's made its way to Texas. Once colonized, they can overfilter a reservoir, removing vital plankton and nutrients from the aquatic food chain. Zebra mussels damage boats, foul shorelines, and even intercity water pipes, costing millions of dollars to repair. Their microscopic larvae can survive for days in water trapped in a boat. Make sure you're not spreading invasive species. Always clean, drain, and dry your boat, trailer, and fishing gear. And never release unwanted aquarium beds or water into natural waters or storm sewers. If we aren't careful, it's hello exotics, goodbye Texas lakes, and no one who loves Texas wants that to happen.
So I hope you enjoyed that. In conclusion, in final, the lakes and ponds biome is vital to a lot of different organisms, and it is also vital to us for freshwater resources and